One of the first things I remember talking to Courtney about before she came on in this position was not just can she do it in terms of talent, but I said, one of the things that I think after 20-some years in watching and being a part of music ministries that is imperative is that you have to have a leader who gets lost in worship before she can or he can inspire worship. And Courtney, I would say to you, just do that really well wherever you went. There you are, right in front. And so I was looking over you. But I really appreciate that about Courtney, and we're very, very, very fortunate to have her leadership. Very sincere, very authentic, and talented goes unsaid, but there's a lot of other things that go into that, so appreciate your leadership a lot. I really do. I didn't ask them to applaud, but that's just an exclamation mark on the rest of what I said, so good. Guys, I don't know, this is a risky thing to say. I have your attention now, don't I? This is a really risky thing for me to say. It feels risky anyway. I didn't prepare well this week. That doesn't necessarily mean the sermon's going to be shorter. It generally that means the sermon's going to be longer because I'd ramble more. But no, I didn't. And boy, it kind of leaves me in a lurch, honestly, because you struggle. I struggle. This will sound. I don't know how this will sound to you, so I'm not going to tell you how it'll sound. Normally, I don't have this problem. I mean, normally I just very seldom I sit up here and think, I'm not ready. Today, I don't know that I'm really ready to preach well to you. So it could be a disclaimer. Maybe I'm just doing a disclaimer that you don't have your expectations very high. Maybe you never do. But I'm going to throw myself at the feet of Jesus as I try to do every week, but for your benefit, and so that we don't waste 20 or 30 minutes of your time. You're like, 20 minutes? When has it ever been 20 minutes? Really, Casey? Let's just ask him to take this offering of a message and bless it for his glory. Pray with me. Father, I feel like a wreck when it comes to not preparing well today. I don't know what to do with that, but I do know that these are your people, that you've gathered here, people on a journey toward Jesus and people on a journey with Jesus, and God, you have great things in store, and you're not limited by me. I know that, God. I'm absolutely 100% certain. So I guess, God, what I want to do is get out of the way and be honest before you and before these people, and ask you to take what is prepared, and just as you took bread, a little bit of bread, and you blessed it exponentially, would you do that with this message? You would bless it exponentially beyond anything that I could lay claim to. And so, God, I know that you love these people. There's not a one of them that you're not passionately, deeply in love with as a person, and you care deeply for. So use this, God, for your glory and their benefit, all of our benefit. And we'll trust you, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen. I wanted to say this when you say at the end, but Bill Watts shared with me the Tanglewood service that normally takes place today is going to be canceled because the snow showers that are going to just kind of move through and give us a light dusting have decided to camp a little bit more than that. So anyway, is that right? Yeah, so no Tanglewood today, all right? I want to make sure we said that before we dismiss today. Let's talk about our statement. I don't even know what to call our statement, but if I do it like this. If somebody were to ask us what we're about, we would say this, and I would want you, and you don't have to necessarily use these exact words, but I would want you to say something in return of, we're learning to do life with God in community. That's why we are a fellowship of Christians here, that we want to, together, we want to learn to do our lives with God, not just for God, not just in light of the fact that we claim Christianity as our main priority in religion, but we literally are going to do we're learning to do moment by moment life for God, not just show up on Wednesday and Sunday, not just give a little money here and there, not just, try to, shape up our language or some of our conduct, but we're literally saying that as we gather together as a church family, our overarching purpose and goal, our aim and ambition, the culture that we want to establish is is to help people who regularly gather at Covenant Baptist Church for all of the things that we do, whether it's a worship service or a Super Bowl party or whatever it is, or a men's conference, that we are learning to do our lives with Jesus, in conjunction with, in submission to, under His leadership, and that we do that in community. So we're going to talk about the community part because we've been talking about what it looks like to do life with God. So we're going to break to the second part of the statement, what does community look like? So by community, I want to tell you what I'm not talking about. Because I grew up in a community of people. You would call it a community. It was a small town. Or if you're from Auburn, you would call it a community. Generally, we mean a smaller group of people that know, there's a sense of knowing and being known. And it's kind of like a community is a noun. But we're not talking about a location of people, but really we're talking about, when I say community, I'm talking about the nature and quality of relationships, the nature and the quality of relationships that exist among a specific group of people, i.e. you. So when we talk about community, when we express this thought, I'm asking you to think locally for one time, for sure. I'm talking about this group of people that is right here, right now, and those that regularly gather with us, okay? It's not like if you're here today, you're in and everybody else is out if they're sick. That's not it. We're talking about the people who regularly have fellowship with us. We're talking about the nature and the quality of the relationships that exist here on a regular basis. And you can say, well, that is really detailed. That is, there's a lot of different kinds of relationships here. Some of you don't even have relationship with others. So let me break that down a little bit more. Really what we're kind of getting at is the culture of our relationships. And I didn't want to define too many words for us today, but culture is kind of what I'm talking about. You know, when you walk in, every church has a culture, whether you try to develop it or not. Every business, every entity tends to have a culture, an environment or an atmosphere that's kind of built around priorities and values and kind of the indistinguishables. There's a culture. Some cultures are stiff and formal, and some cultures are more loose and relational. And so what I'm talking about in terms of communities kind of gets down to what kind of culture do we have in our relationships? What is the flavor of relationship that you find here in general, okay? So we're not talking about community because we're here at 5440 Southwest 37th Street. We're talking about what are the pervasive kinds of relationships? What do you hear people talking about? What do you hear leaders talking about? What are the values that are coming forth? So the community we're speaking of is a community of disciples that we can and should have, that kind of community as disciples of Jesus that we can and should have. So what are the nature, what's the quality of relationships that can exist here, that maybe we even could say should exist here? So just to state the obvious, we're talking about, again, the local church. And we can speak about the local church like all the local churches, and they should have this kind of community. But I really want us to own this, and I'm not putting us in kind of in opposition to any other church. I'm just saying I really want us, I think it's valuable. I don't know, I think the Spirit would say this to us, that for one time, and I would never want this to be a pervasive way of thinking, but today, and as we go through this, I want you to think about this specific, unique congregation, fellowship of people. It's a community, we are a community of disciples. With those, eagerly celebrating those who are on the road to being disciples, who are curious, who are exploring, who are asking questions, who are kind of tiptoeing into that or boldly exploring. So we're the community of disciples with others in our midst. So our aim today is this, to begin to explore what this kind of community with each other looks like. When we say, in other words, we exist to learn how to do life with God in community, what is the last two words of that statement? What in the world does that mean? In community. Mean? What does that look like? What are the expectations there? And I'm shocked every time I looked outside. I'm a little ADD this morning off my medicine. I'm like, there's a lot of snow out there. Snow showers. I watched it 3 times. All right, focus right here. Snow. All right, so here's what we have. And some of this is really going to be stating the obvious. But this community that we have to state this. The community, the glue, if you think of it like a magnet. You ever had one of those big magnets, like a yard magnet, you run over the yard after they do construction, it just pulls up nails from 3 feet away? It's a lot of fun. Think of it like a magnet, like the thing that attracts us together, that brings us together, that the cohesive nature of our relationships is Jesus. So you can go, oh, duh, but I want us to say it out loud, to hear it out loud, that our community is built around a devotion to, or at least, maybe on the periphery, an interest in, but at the core, a common and shared devotion to Jesus. In 1 John 1:3, it says this. It says, what we have seen and heard, we proclaim to you, we shout it out to you, we teach. And so why? So that you two, he says, so that you two may also have fellowship with us. And fellowship and community are pretty close in how I'm using them, those two terms, so that you could have community. You could say that so that you two could have community with us. And indeed, our fellowship, what's brought us together in the first place, is with the Father and His Son, Jesus Christ. So this is the primary, single most important aspect of community of disciples of Christ, of Jesus. I'm not speaking about a denomination when I say disciples of Christ. Disciples, the community of Christ is built around a common and shared devotion at the core, devotion to Jesus. And as that circle widens, you'll get people who are curious about Jesus. There's not necessarily devotion to Jesus, but there's an interest. And we need that. That is a healthy thing. We embrace that. We want that. We would never do anything to diminish that. We uphold that and celebrate that at the core there's a devotion, but that spreads out into interest and curiosity. So that's the foundation. That's the bottom line. Now let's talk about the nature and the quality of this. And by the way, there's a lot to this, so this is not a one-part thing. We're going to kind of do about 2 of these every week for the next 2 or 3 weeks. So here's the foundation. There's the foundation. I mean, here's it. I said foundation is that, but the thing that draws us together, that inaugurates all of that, is our devotion to Jesus. But if you're going to say, if you're looking at the nature and the quality of our relationships, at the bottom line is love. And a specific kind of love, by the way, and the Bible uses this and calls it agape love, which is God kind of love. Now, this is a love that's selfless, sacrificial. Oftentimes, if it's in its purest forms, you would see it as being radical. I mean, almost offensive at times, wasteful, over-the-top kind of love that gives itself away at all expense. And here's what Jesus says in John 15:12. He said, "This is my commandment." Boy, those should be 4 words that would perk up all of our... We got Jesus saying something very clear. This is what I want you to do. This is the bottom line. This is my commandment. What? And he says this, that you love one another just as I've loved you. Oh, is that... No. You heard the first part, but maybe you didn't tune in the second part where he says, you love one another. We go, oh, well, we can do that. We're going to love each other tonight at the Super Bowl. We're going to hang out. No. He said, my commandment is that you love one another as I have loved you. Well, that changes stuff. Because Jesus died for me. That's pretty selfless. That's radically sacrificial. We back up there. It got real quiet there. You're going to take us there? I'm not taking us there. It's already there. We're talking about community of disciples is built around this pervasive kind of radical notion of love. It's easy to love when it's easy to love. when I don't have any skin in the game, when I don't have to give up much, when I can give out of my overflow. But what if you have to give out of your deficit? What if you have to give something that really costs you? What if you have to give something that changes how you do your life just for the benefit of somebody else? What if you have to give it up? When I'm talking about community, doing life together in community, we're saying at the very core, we are learning to agape love one another. Now, you have to hang with me through this series or you're going to back out quick and say, I really wasn't in church for all of that. I really didn't, I guess for the really committed folks, you could go there, but I'm not really in. Let me tell you something. If you could never agape, you could never love one another in this way, where you will not find yourself absolutely radically filled up exponentially more than you could ever give away. It is the nature of agape love that it returns itself to you. It is not a program of how do you get God to like you more or love you more, but it is the nature, the dynamic of giving oneself away for the benefit of others in an economy of God and the community that He establishes, that agape love has a way of circling back into your life, refilling you so you can re-spill it out over and over again. But on the front end, the spilling out part is sacrificial, costly, and inconvenient. That's the nature. You say, well, I don't know. Where do you get that? I get that from Jesus. I really do. Not being snide or cute, but look what He did. Okay, that's agape. I don't have to explain it all. He came to earth. He died. He lived. Just coming to earth, folks, was not a pleasure for Him. I mean, you give up glory. You give up, beauty. You give up the pre-existent relationship of Trinitarian fellowship between God the Father and the Son. The God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and you step into the quagmire and muck and the wreck that we've made out of this world. Just coming was a big, giant sacrifice. But to yield Himself sacrificially to the brutal death on the cross for our benefit is beyond imagination and beyond my pay grade to ever try to explain how deep of love that is. So we're never going to be there, but we're moving in that direction in agape love, and it is the foundation. So he says it like this in Romans. Paul says, be devoted to one another. Listen to this. This is a command. This is an imperative, meaning a command. It's not a suggestion or an idea or an option. He commands, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Give preference to one another in honor. The single most defining aspect of community we're talking about is deep, sincere love for one another. That you can't get into a fellowship, into a community of people at Covenant and not get loved like this. This is what this is about. This is the direction we're moving. This is the culture we're trying to establish and are seeing established. This was such a defining aspect of how the earliest disciples would relate to each other. Listen to what Jesus said. He said, by this, all men will know you are my disciples. Now let me just push pause and say, how would you fill that blank in? By what? By knowing all the right doctrine, by how much money I give, how smart I am, how I dress, what church I go to, how I vote, what doctrine I uphold and espouse in my political realms. How are people really going to know that I'm your disciple? Just by what? If you have love for one another. Now let me put this another way. Hear this. You would know, if you've been here at all, we are radically, this is not a new thing, we are living as a church that is focused not just inwardly but outwardly. We want to express the love of Jesus in service and sacrifice and love for our community. I think that's imperative. But what Jesus, this is Jesus. He said, but that is not necessarily how people are going to recognize you as my disciples. How they're going to recognize that you are my disciples is how you love each other. See, how are you going to love a world that's not going to love you back if you aren't loving each other first? Do you see how important it is to have this agape love for one another? Now, agape love does not stop when it just loves each other. Now, I got to turn the heat down. I'm sorry. There we go. Whew, wasn't just you. If you're shivering, you're just going to have to get over it. I'm going to pass out. Yeah. That's for you, not for me. I'm just kidding. That's just a joke because Kevin said something. All right. Now, I know I can believe that somebody could be cold in here, but it's almost unbelievable. Now, let me just say it this way. This is the bottom line. If like Paul said in Corinthians, if you don't have love, you've got nothing else. You could have everything else going on in the world. Man, we could be the greatest service organization in the whole community of Topeka, Kansas. Man, we could be doing, knocking the doors off of benevolent kind of stuff and serving people who are downtrodden and doing all this stuff. But he says, if you don't love one another, if you don't have agape love inwardly, cohesively, almost intrinsically, that is woven into the fabric of what it's like to be here. It's not something you have to tell people to do. It's a culture you step into. That if that is not there, you're nothing. You got nothing. So it's the foundation of the community is this kind of love. Now, are we there yet? No. Are we on our way? Absolutely. Where are we compared to where we were 5 years ago? I believe light years beyond that. And you haven't heard me necessarily teaching on it or pounding on it, but this is a work that God is doing really, and today what I'm doing is just calling attention to it. This is really a work of the Spirit that He's doing in our midst as we focus on the right things, that we are beginning to love one another more deeply, more sacrificially, in opportunities where it's less convenient and more inconvenient, more costly. And that is a thing that I celebrate in massive ways as your pastor. Really, really good. So, the rest of what we're going to talk about will all be built on that if we don't have love for one another in that way, none of this other stuff matters, okay? But I'm at a point where I can see this agape love as kind of a fabric that's here. It's woven into the culture of our community. And now we can look at these other things and begin to honestly assess where we are and where we need to go. So let's look at two things today and then we're done. This should be and is growing to be. These are all things that are here and need to and can continue to grow. But first, check this out. The culture of a community of disciples of Jesus is a culture that should be free from rejection. Now listen to that closely. A culture entirely free from the fear of being rejected. What is the nature of stepping into a group of people? What is the predominant fear somebody would have? Rejection. Somebody not liking you. You feeling judged. You being kept at a distance. Not being able to break in. You can just go to a middle school campus and watch this posturing and all of this happen at any middle school in the United States. Constant desire and need to find a place where you're accepted, or another way to put it is to find a place where you're not rejected. Not rejected. Isolation, listen, isolation is one thing, but being isolated because you have been rejected is quite another. That is, if I'm by myself by choice, I'm quite okay with that. But if I'm by myself because I have been forced into that position by rejection from a group that I want to be or feel like I need to, that is quite another. Now the church, the culture that we've been given and we're called to establish is a culture that it should be free, absolutely free from the fear of rejection. So Paul said this, therefore, he said, let us not judge one another anymore. Listen to those words. Let's not judge one another anymore. In other words, stop it. Just stop it. He said, but rather, determine this. Listen to how strong his language is. Make a decisive decision in your heart to not put an obstacle or a stumbling block in any brother's way. First and foremost, never reject via judgment someone else. The community of people that will gather together in the name of Christ are not gathering in differing levels of importance and significance. This is unlike any other social arena that you will ever be in or should be. Unfortunately, oftentimes the church is not. Unfortunately, the church is sometimes just a mere reflection or even exaggeration of what you see in other cultures. That is, there's varying levels of acceptance and priority and power and position and posturing and all of that stuff. How can you have community when you have a constant, incessant fear of rejection? No one likes to say that we're afraid of rejection, and the tougher, more rugged types might even poo-poo the idea that I don't care who likes me. And by the way, I'm going to just tell you something, just to get to know people. The more someone touts that they don't care what other people think of them, what could you conclude? They care a lot about what other people think of them. And I would tell you that very, very, very few people, I've never met one besides me. No, I'm just kidding. I've never met one that doesn't care. We all care what people think. I'm not saying should or shouldn't, but I've never met somebody who really doesn't care. Because we have a need for community. And so we thus have a need in the church to have a community that's free from the fear of being rejected. Paul said it like this in 1 Corinthians 12:25. Let it be so that there may be no division. Not some. He said no division in the body. But the members may have the same care. The same care for one another. Whether you've been here a week or 10 years. Whether you're a deacon or no service place at all. Whether you know the Bible exponentially well or whether you've never even read it. Whether you still have bad habits or whether you think you've cleaned your cup on the outside well. The same care across the board for everybody that God brings to our community. And that there is no fear of rejection. How often we talk about this? Not a lot. But it is so, so important. Think of the attractive beauty of a community of people where you could say to your coworkers and your friends, I know for sure if you come to that fellowship of people, whether it's a worship service, Super Bowl party, or an Easter egg hunt, you will find a group of people who will not reject you. Well, you could say that to people honestly? Think of the people. Think of the people who Jesus went to. They were all the people who had been rejected. They weren't just afraid of it, they were living in it. We are called to be a community of people that's free, utterly void of rejection. Now, I understand I'm saying that in a way that seems unrealistic. And I understand that part. I do. I get that. That we're never, as long as we got people here who are on a journey, there's going to be the potential that somebody could reject another person. I get that. I understand that. But we're talking about the pervasive culture, the one that kind of saturates us, the predominant narrative, to use the word that we're using a lot. The predominant value is we're not going to reject you. We're not going to size you up and see how valuable you are to us so that we can see, they got a lot of talent that we can use. They got a lot of money we can spend. They got a lot of popularity that we can benefit from. Oh, yeah, we'll take you in. We'll give you a seat at the front of the table, so to speak. Oh, you don't have any of that stuff? We'll take you, but come along. Don't cause any problems. That's rejection. That's nothing more than you're not as valuable as this person. And in the fellowship of Christ, it says, accept one another in Romans 15:7. Accept one another just as Christ also accepted us to the glory of God. So it's a community free from rejection. The second thing and the last thing we're going to talk about, it's a community that's eager and able to forgive. Eager is an important word in this one. Eager to forgive. Have you ever needed the forgiveness of somebody who was willing but not real eager? What's that taste like? I forgive you. How forgiven do you feel when someone sighs out a forgiveness to you? They're willing, maybe because they feel obligated, but they're not real eager. They're like, dang it, I'm stuck. I'm a Christian. I've got to forgive them. That doesn't feel right. Now, I don't care how you size it up. That is not even really the nature of forgiveness. But the community, and the culture of the community that is being established at Covenant, that is growing and is more pervasive all the time, is a community that's eager Eager gives you the idea that they step forward. They don't sit back and say, well, you come ask and I might forgive you. We'll just see how penitent you really are. We'll see how sorry you sound. We'll see if you say it right. I might. I probably will because I got to, but let's see how it goes. That's not eager. Eager finds the offender. Eager steps forward and makes grace and forgiveness so known that it feels very safe to step towards that. Eager is important here. And I think when we understand and we reflect on and we take in how we have been forgiven, and we will eagerly, readily forgive others. So we're able to forgive. We're eager and able, all because of how we've been forgiven in Jesus. So it's been explained to me like this, that to feel in any way that it took more of God's grace to forgive me, or let me say it like this. No, let me say it like that. If it took more of God's grace to forgive me than it did you, or you're sitting in the same position, you say, well, yeah, it took a lot of God's grace to forgive Pastor Casey. I've heard his story. He was a wreck. He's still a wreck, but he was even more a wreck then. And man, I'm sure that God took at least 3 centuries to rebuild his grace supply after he poured some out on Casey. Well, to do this comparative forgiveness of God is like, this tells you when I heard this, it's like looking at Michael Jordan and saying, well, Michael, I don't know, how high, where's Gene Kessel? How high was his vertical, do you remember? It was tall. Okay. Thank you for that very specific answer. I appreciate that. It's very tall. Michael Jordan could jump real high for long ways. Thanks. Told you I wasn't prepared. These things just come to me. All right. And saying, well, all right, the measurement of success or effectiveness is who can get closer to the moon? Michael Jordan over me. Almost anybody but me. Okay, my vertical's like 3 inches, not feet. So, but is it really a significant difference when you're talking about getting to the moon? Is Michael Jordan really significantly closer to the moon than I am when he did his vertical? He probably still, I might be close to him now. Gosh, he's old. Huh? 48 inches. That's real tall. So he could jump about as tall as this table is. Maybe a little higher than that. That is tall. And long, like he could do it from from the free throw line. That's a long ways. Is he really closer to the moon when he does that than me when I go? A little bit. But not when you're going to the moon, folks. So when you say, wow, that person was a drug addict. Wow, that person killed somebody. Wow, that person stole. Wow, that person committed adultery. Well, I never did any of that externally, just kind of on the inside, but not really. That's like saying, wow, Michael Jordan was so much closer to the moon than me, and versus God really had to really, really, really work hard to forgive those bad people, and not so bad. I didn't tax him too much. We're all in the same stinking boat. We're a wreck. It took the same grace, how much? Jesus on a cross to extend grace and forgiveness to us, to wash us clean, to restore us, redeem us, and bring us back. That means this. All I have to say this. It's ludicrous to say, I'll take your grace that is validated and verified and carried out on the cross, and I'll take your forgiveness, God. I'm not sure I want to offer it to them. How does that work? Right? How do we do that? Anytime we're struggling, listen, this is true. I believe this with all of my heart. I don't care how well I prepared. I knew this before I ever studied this week, that anytime I am struggling to forgive somebody else, I have lost my view of the cross. I have forgotten all about it. Because anytime I look at what Jesus did for me, I realize, oh my goodness, I could only eagerly forgive my fellow pilgrim in this train wreck of life marred by sin. We're muddling through this together with the grace of Jesus. I am no further ahead. It didn't take any more grace to forgive them than me. We're in the same boat. We have to be a community of people who's eager and able to forgive. So Ephesians 4:32, be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving each other. How? Just as God in Christ has also forgiven you. See, he used that same reasoning in Colossians. Paul does it. Bearing with one another. Bearing with. You can't say it better than that. We're bearing with one another. Forgiving each other. You get this idea of continual, ongoing, pervasive, cultural kind of forgiveness. We're bearing with one another, forgiving each other. How often? As often as we need to. Whoever has complained against anyone. Listen to how total the sum of this is. You're forgiving each other constantly. Whoever has a complaint against anyone, how? Just as the Lord also forgave you, so also should you. When God adds a member to this community of disciples of Jesus, they must know they are entering a community where forgiveness is understood, because forgiveness is such a common link between us all. You have to know it. Because you're gonna mess up, aren't you? We're all going to forgive the weatherman because he said we're getting a dusting of snow. Did you know it's still snowing out there? Who do I forgive? Whoever you have a complaint against. Well, what if they're not sorry? I don't know if they're sorry or not, but it doesn't say anything about that, them being sorry. It says you forgive them. Forgives them something you do. It's a condition of your heart. It's an extension you make. Were you crawling around asking for forgiveness when Jesus died on the cross? No, it wasn't on your radar at all. God loved you and extended forgiveness, grace. It's accessed, it's realized. Yes, listen, it's realized when you embrace it. But the condition of our heart needs to be in a posture of forgiveness towards anybody and everybody as soon as we can get there. And if you can't get there on your own, you need to go to a brother or sister and confess, I'm having a very difficult time harboring this grudge against so-and-so, and I need you to turn my face, take my face in your hands, and turn it towards the cross. And I need to see that. I need to hear that. Because my heart is wrong. Because I can't forgive my brother. I know that I'm not really soaking in the forgiveness God's given me. When Peter asked Jesus, great question. Don't you love Peter? Everybody, you got to identify with Peter. He's got a great idea. Jesus, I don't know who he has in mind, but it's got to be one of the disciples that's driven him crazy. Jesus, how often do I have to forgive my brother? 7 times? 7's kind of a number of completion. Okay, it wasn't just an arbitrary number. It was like 7 is whole, complete. So, Jesus, how often do I have to forgive my brother when he sins against me? Because Andrew is driving me absolutely berserk. I think Jesus would first say, Peter, you have no idea. There are 11 other people that think you're crazy, and they've all forgiven you. I don't know if that was in there or not. But Jesus' response is this. I say to you not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Don't go 490. Okay, 490. I got to keep track. That was not the point. The point was as often as needed. How often do I forgive people? As often as you need to. Do you want somebody keeping track for you? Well, and isn't this hard? Like when you have to forgive the same person over and over and over and over? Don't you just go, when are they going to get it? Are they really sorry? Da 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 da. Now wait a minute. Wait a minute. There's not a person in here who hadn't gone back to God, their head hanging, going, I did it again. You going to forgive me again? Oh, Jesus says, where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. You can't out-sin God's grace. You can't even tax it. You can't even cause any substantial difference in the quantity of an eternal amount of grace. You can't do it. But you know what it's like. When your brother sins against you for the 15th time, you know what it's like because you do that. Oh, maybe not against them, but you've certainly done it against God. How many times has He forgiven you? Well, not the same thing. Oh, come on. Come on, yeah. Lust is always lust. Doesn't matter if it was this woman or that one. Greed is always greed, whether it was money or a house. Hate is always hate, whether it was a politician or someone who's hurt you. Yeah, you've gone back bucket loads of time, the same problem. And every time you went back to Jesus, He extended grace. Every time. And the 402nd, 43rd time, He didn't say, I'm getting a little tired of this. I'm not excusing repetitive sin. I'm not at all. I'm just saying we need to be eager and willing to forgive one another, and it needs to be a part of our culture and our climate. And I celebrate the fact that it largely is. I mean, I think this is a pretty real thing here for so many people. I really, really do. But I want us to celebrate it and grow in it. So as we talk about the community of Christ, we said 2 things today. Well, we said 4 things, actually. We said this. We said it's built around, the magnet is Jesus. Our devotion to, curiosity, interest in Jesus. Draws us together. It builds the cohesive part of why we're all here because of Jesus. If there was no Jesus, we wouldn't be here today at this time, all right? And then the foundational quality is agape love. We're learning to love each other sacrificially, and that's a growth thing because we don't get there instantly. And here's how that agape love kind of flows out, is that we're a community that's free from rejection, and we're a community that's eager and able to forgive. By the way, these all dovetail together, right? Freedom from rejection, boy, we better be really eager and willing to forgive, because those grease each other real well. So, church, I just want you to chew on this. I want you to think about it. I want you to process it. I want you to take that in and be a part of deepening and establishing that kind of community here, so that when you talk to somebody who's broken and hurting and on the fringe of society, much less the church, that you can say, I know a place where you can be absolutely free of rejection. Teenagers, you got friends that you know people who walk into your hall, you can see them. They're slump-shouldered and the head's always down, and they've been rejected so many times they're not taking that chance anymore. So what would it be like if you could go to them and say, I know a group of teenagers that will not reject you. You come just like you are. You don't have to be cool. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be athletic. You don't have to be musical. You could just be you, and you will be. And when you mess up, we'll forgive you, and you forgive us. That alone would be, more attractive than words have to say. So church, let's move in this direction. When we say we're here to do life with God in community, let's get a real idea of what that means. So stick with this and come back and hear the rest of that story, okay? Let's walk through this together. Let's chew on it. Talk about it at lunch today. Talk about it at the Super Bowl party that you will come to tonight, or we're not going to forgive you. That didn't work out. Talk about it, okay? That's, a lot of times I have an action step, and literally I wanted the action step to be, go talk about this. Flesh it out with each other. Ask hard questions. If you don't agree, if you feel like I'm moving in a direction that's absolutely 100%, this never happens here and probably should, you come talk to me and say, I'm not sure about this. Can I talk to you about that? Doors wide open. I promise to not be defensive or argumentative. I will hear you and listen well. Okay? Let's go that direction together. I'm going to pray, and we get to transition to a beautiful part of community, which is communion. You can see the common root word there, and we're going to enjoy that together in just a moment. But let's let this message sink in as we move into a deeper, even fuller expression of what we're talking about today. So pray with me. God, today we're talking about community, and that is rich, that is deep, that is important. Not just programs, not just budgets, not just structures or plans or But Lord, the kind of community that you want to establish here is so compelling and so rich. I want this so deeply, Father, that we can literally know, that we can be a people that has largely eradicated this fear of rejecting someone, that has largely embraced the notion that we're eager and able to forgive because we've been eagerly and willingly and capably forgiven. You are a good, good Father. Lord, when we look at your grace and what you've done, we just can't help but love you back. So help us to love one another deeply out of the love that we have received in Jesus. And thank you. Amen.